Hi, welcome to my channel where we question everything. I have decided to add another topic to my channel, and this topic is called Why I Disagree with ... which means I will explain why I disagree with certain narratives and certain analysts. I'm also going to change the format a little bit in terms of that I will not speak continuously. I will handle a certain topic and then I will cut and paste, so you will see some how you call it, sections that might slightly differ from the general video. So let's start. My first video is going to be why I disagree with the Duran Podcast held on the 23rd of September, where their guest speaker was Garland Nixon. And we were basically, there are some topics that I do disagree, and I would like to present an alternative view. Now, my usual problem is that people my argument is that the world is a complex environment. You can call it a complex beast. It is cannot be described as simple events. And a good example would be that the traditional butterfly effect. That a small event can have a huge impact on the final outcome of another event. And just that principle alone should give you an idea that there are many variables that have to be considered, and actually infinite amount of variables. And that would be impossible. That's one of the reasons why it is so difficult to predict weather patterns. Well, weather patterns you can do to a certain extent, but there's always some local event that can influence the whole weather pattern. So what I sometimes fear is that the Duran is looking too much on the day-to-day basis and forgetting the bigger picture. And one has to analyze what was being said, what is being said in the context of the bigger picture. So my bigger picture of the world is that it all revolves around money. Money, 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 money. And there's a general saying that usually if you want to analyze a certain event, then follow the money. Now, it's not always true, but in most cases it's true, because money has replaced, or is a tool that has replaced basically, or made trade efficient. Now, in the old days, you were a farmer and you grew your own products, whether it was grain or raised animals, and then you will swap it out with your neighbor, and there was trade going on, barter. But that's very difficult, because how do you trade? How much bushels of corn do you trade for a sheep and so forth? And then money was created, and there's the one. But then also the other skills do. If you are a carpenter, then the farmer will need a certain tool, and he has to employ a carpenter. But the carpenter is not a farmer, and then you have to barter again between the woodwork being done, and it makes all difficult. So we all finally converge into a civilization where we're not all producers of edibles like in the old days, but we have certain functions, and money is the form of exchange. And people in the city have to do certain tasks and earn money in order to barter with the farmers. And well, you can see it's a very complicated situation. So money, unfortunately, is a central theme to our living standards. And it is essential. Yes, money can't buy everything, but they say it pays for a hell of a lot. And in the day, you need money to survive. That's the basic rule. And then you have to have money if you want to increase your lifestyle, and that's also understandable. But if you really want to do it, not a core principle, but it's a technique if you want to analyze certain events, to follow the money. Because somebody always benefits and who loses. Those are basic questions that everybody should actually be asking. All right. So one has to ask yourself, is America a true empire? Is it a true hegemony entity? And I would disagree with that. It's all about money. After the Second World War, the Americans obtained an unfair advantage in the position of the world by the establishment of the dollar as a reserve currency, and then later on the petrodollar. And it was even entrenched later on by the fall of the Soviet Union and the imbalance that actually started in world affairs. And then there was a rise of China, and then now it is a rise of Russia to reestablish a balance. But at the end of the day, it's all about America maintaining its lifestyle, which has become impossible to do. All the resources of America cannot support the lifestyle, so they have to get external financing. And that means in the old days, they would colonize certain countries. But in the modern time, we use different techniques. And that is by using the tools and the financial currency, the financial tools, which are very strong in certain extent, and the control that the dollar has. And America has to be financed by the rest of the world in order to make up for the shortfall in the American economy. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And for that, you need to control countries, and you have to do certain things. And like I said, it's a very complicated effect or affair to manage. And it's not always capable of doing it, and there are so many variables that there are mistakes made. The Americans have made mistakes by exporting their manufacturing capability, by actually financializing everything, in the old days, they would coerce certain countries by showing them the carrot. And if they didn't want to do it, then they will show the whip. But things have so deteriorated in America that these days they cannot show the carrot anymore. They only can show the whip. And the more you show the whip, then the less sensitive the donkey will come and react. So unfortunately, this is one of the things that has developed. And I can talk now hours and hours about the history and what can cause all the matters, but I don't want to really go into that. Bottom line is, I don't believe the Americans are really as an hegemonic empire, unless I understand the concept wrong. They need they need the rest of the world to support their living style. And all of the policies that the Americans are doing is to ensure that. Now, if you look at the history of the American empire for the last couple of years, say 30, 40 years, there was the Eastern crisis, the collapse of the Tigers in Japan and so on. That was a minority for a financial attack of the Americans to suck up them dry and confiscate their assets. If you look at some of the wars that the Americans done, Libya, Iraq, and so on, the first thing that they always did is they would confiscate that country's gold and then take it away. And they also would freeze their assets, and Libya's asset and billions of dollars and so on, because they would in American banks. Basically, that is their reward. So it's all about money again. And if you look at sometimes other events, is they would stir the pot in order to create a situation of conflict, but not going as far to do a conflict, just to do the pretend that there or possibility, the risk of a conflict, in order for them to sell weapons and keep the military industrial complex going, because that's still one of the big manufacturing capabilities in America. And this is why they stirred the recent events in Taiwan. And Nancy Pelosi flew there. And what was the result of that? The Americans are now going to supply them some billions worth of military equipment. They didn't really want a war, oh, war well, it's good for business, but it's also destructive, and you cannot really control it. And no, that's a high risk situation. So they just tap the bear, tap the hornet's nest. Just don't let the hornets come out. And the same with Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine had two benefits, or there were two objectives about Ukraine. And the one was a military one, and they might turn Ukraine in order to contain Russia. And the reason why they want to contain Russia is that Russia should not become big enough in order to prevent their actions in the world to suck the world dry and finance the American lifestyle. So that was one of the purposes. And the one they would do is that they might install some military system in the Ukraine in the same way they're doing in Poland and Romania. But I think the Americans knew that was a red line. They started to pursue that. But they invested in the coup in 2014, and they sent a hell of a lot of weapons to Ukraine. So the military industrial complex was done. And then they sort of stripped Ukraine from its assets. Because a lot, I think 25% of Ukrainian farmlands, agricultural land, has already been sold to the big hedge funds and investment funds in America. And then there was also the sale of the partnership of the gas transfer pipeline, which the Ukrainians have. So a lot of the Ukrainian assets have already been strip mined, if you want to call it like that, by the financial institutions in Ukraine. So another benefit. But the problem is that the whole operation went wrong. They didn't expect that Russia will react and annex Crimea. And they didn't also expect the two republics in the east, the Donbass, to set up a resistance. So unfortunately, those plans went a little bit wrong. And now things have developed, and basically we are in the mess they were. It was the wrong decision. People make mistakes. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Duran always talks about these hotspots. Yes, hotspots are fine when you can control them. You should never allow them. You can push it up to the red line, but never go over the red line. So low. And if you look at everything that the Americans always do, they are always pushing. The sanctions that were done in the Ukrainian, that were already against the Russians, were already long-term planned, and the Russians were warned about. The problem is that somewhere, some other calculations went wrong. They assumed, the West assumed, or the Americans and the Europeans, assumed that for some other reason that the Russian economy will collapse. And by that, they will still be able, okay, I don't want to go to that, whether they would strip Russia. That's a little bit, not far-fetched, but it's going to be very difficult. So the best option would be contain Russia. In any case, so they predicted that the Russian economy will collapse due to sanctions, and the whole matter will be over. That was their objective. And unfortunately, it was a miscalculation. And now their actions have backfired, and the Europeans are sitting without energy. Well, they have energy, but not enough. And the energy they have are very expensive. So the decision went wrong. That's the only thing that really happened. But it's not a loss for America. What has happened? Germany, Switzerland, all these guys are now going to buy American weapons, F-35s and whatever you want to call them, and all the other weapons. It's a boom, it's a plus sign for America. Good. They've done their function. Then, no gas? Yeah, we will give you gas. America is now supplying LNG to Europe. They make profits about 700%. Hey, that's good business. Oil prices went up. Good. So the Americans are benefiting. But unfortunately, the Americans have become short-sighted because they've been seeing that they are reaching the end of the road. They've been kicking the can down the road now for a long time. And the road is now ending. So all the benefits that they are seeing now is just a short term. Another topic that they discussed was basically the nuclear option. Now, yes, both Alexandra and Garland said that there will be no nuclear Armageddon or a nuclear war. Well, Garland basically said that the Russians and the Chinese are working very carefully, not to entice not the fanatics, the lunatics in Washington to press the button. Well, yes, I fully agree. There will be no atomic conflict. And the reason would be fairly simple. Unless you have a lunatic and you look at the movie of Dr. Strangelove and you expect such a scenery, well, that is unfortunately, that would be unfortunate. The point here is that we all know that Biden is just a puppet. The president of America has long been lost his real relevance and he's controlled by the deep state. He has some independence, but not enough to really make certain decisions. We also know that there's a lot of powerful people behind the scenes. And at the end of the day, they are controlling what's happening. And they will never allow nuclear conflict because it would be senseless and they will lose in any case. And who wants to live in the aftermath of an Armageddon? What type of life will you have? Yes, you can gather as much food as you want and as luxuries and so on, but that will last you only a certain period and then what afterwards? So unless some idiot tries to do it, then that will happen. But it will be a lunatic that will press that button. So I believe the chances are very, very small for that. Although there's a lot of propaganda and hysteria about the matter, it's not going to happen. And then there was also mentioned that on the sideline of Sarkand, the meeting of the SAO, that the Russians and Chinese were actually discussing the manufacturing of microchips. Well, for me, that is actually an obvious path that they would follow. The Russians have superior technology. I think they can manufacture even 3D CPUs, which the Americans can't even do. They manufacture 100% of all platters for microchips. The latest manufacturing techniques, which is common available and Chinese can produce, go up to production density of 14 nanometers, which 90% of the chips are in any case made. It's only when you go to high specialized chips and computer chips that you want to go to the 7 nanometers. But the Chinese are doing enough research and the Russians are doing enough research, so there's no reason for them not to reach that type of resolution or manufacturing capability in a year or 2 years' time, and even lower. It's just common sense. So I'm not totally sure why this is a big issue. And again, stand it back a little bit back and think about the problems or the situation. You get a different view when you stand back and watch it from a distance. In any case, the discussion goes further, and Garland actually talks about the principle of marketing insistence, which according to what he explains is that you entice the people until they actually demand it, and then the leadership will supply it. And I'm sorry, I cannot see the same thing. He tries to projected onto the Russian decisions on what has to be done and so on. And unfortunately, I cannot support that idea. The point here is that political leaders are leaders. They don't go and wait for the population to decide. And popular opinion is not a good barometer or a guideline for your actions. What the Russians have done is that in 2014, when the coup in Ukraine was established and Crimea was incorporated, the Western world has enforced sanctions onto Russia. Now, in 2014, Russia was still importing food. Now it's exporting food. So you can see that there was a huge effort by the Russian government to prepare for this action that we are seeing now. They have stopped a lot of holes or loopholes in the economy in order to make them sanction-proof. And that is also one of the biggest reasons why the current sanction regime, in its total most severe application of that principle, still couldn't get the Russian economy to collapse. So, and if you look precisely on how the Russians reacted in Syria, which was not driven by popular opinion, and neither was Georgia, the conflict there, or neither was Ukraine, the special military operation. It was a strategic decision from the leaders from Russia. And it was planned, and it was not only planned, but alternatives were also planned for. They were planned A, B, C, D, E, F, and for all other possible events that could take place too, and every sideline or every side branch that could possibly have been taken. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. Well, then they progressed and look at the situation in Europe and America and what the current financial positions are. Now, like I said before, the Western world didn't expect the Russian economy to be such resilient. They expected the Russians to collapse that economy. And unfortunately, with blowback now, and now you have huge energy problems, inflation in Europe and in America. But one has to just go a little bit back. Of course, inflation didn't start in February. Inflation actually started, I think, a year back, even maybe more. And the reason why inflation finally picked up after so much stimulus was the printing of money, in huge amounts of money, to manage the COVID pandemic. As far as I understand, is that in this period of 2 years, the Americans have added about $6 trillion worth of debt to their national debt. And I think that is what sparked the inflation phenomena. And the same in Europe. They spent a lot of money, mostly social money, social support money. But at least they printed the money and then they put it into the economy. And that is the real cause of the inflation. So the whole collapse of the economic situation in Europe and in America started long before the Russian SMO. And with the unexpected, consequence or the events that are taking place in Ukraine and that the Russian economy didn't collapse, the whole decision by the West became wrong. And it's clear they made the wrong decisions and issued the actions. And now they have big problems. They have an economic crisis. And the way that I understand is that the glass manufacturers have already stopped in Germany. The paper mills are not functioning. They want to close down. There's now for the frozen and fresh produce department have written letters, and insolvency is increasing at a accelerated pace. And they're all writing letters to the government, the leaders of Germany, but we don't hear anything from them. And it doesn't seem that they're going to reverse the initial decision. It's like doubling down, but it's doubling down on a losing side. And as it discussed by Garland also, they will expect riots. Because at the end of the day, if I've discussed in previous videos about the requirements of any human being, and if the lowest level is survival, and there will be a lot of people that will live below the survival line. And therefore there will be some riots, and there will be process actions, and how far they will be allowed to expand and to what severity, that we will see. But it's going to be very difficult. Now, Europe has had a good life living standard, and you will only start to protest and become violent once you reach a level where you have something to lose. And the European people at this stage have still a lot to lose. So it's still going to go on for a little bit of time until even the middle class, who has some reserve money or can lower the living standard without reaching the bottom level of the pyramid, they will absorb the high energy cost and maybe not protest. I'm not sure what the Western leadership is expecting and how they see. A lot of financial institutions are still predicting that the inflation will go down next year, that there will be a slight economic contraction next year, and then in 2024 there will be economic expansion again. But I'm believing they are living in a dream. Well, since February, they have predicted the Russian failure, which didn't happen. They have said that the inflation in America and Europe is just transitionally, it's only temporarily. That has also turned out to be wrong. Each month they are actually increasing their projections for inflation in all of these countries. They are reviewing some of their growth figures for next year and the year after that. So basically they have no clue. They are using mathematical models that are usually developed for stable political situations. But we are living in an unstable political situation. The military aspects is one of them, and the East that is breaking away from the US dollar hedge currency, and they are developing an alternative parallel type of economy. Now, these are unplanned, unforeseen events that are not into the mathematical model. So don't believe any predictions that financial institutions are doing. They are wrong. And also, I've been following the American economy for some while now, and they constantly change the polls, the gold polls. I think that's a statement. It's like the latest one was when you have two consecutive quarters that have a negative growth, and the standard issue is that's a recession. But the Americans have changed it. No, it's not a recession. No, we don't believe it. No recession. Which is a blatant lie. You cannot change the rules of the game mid-game. You abide by the rule, or you don't. But in any case, some Americans have changed the rules. They don't work according to international law. They only work according to the rule-based order. Who the hell knows in any case what the rule-based order is, because I haven't seen any rules yet. The only rule I said is, don't do what we do as we are telling you to do, what you are told. So the conversation goes on, and then looking at the military capability that the West can provide. against a Russian military capability. And basically they say, yes, the West cannot mobilize enough forces. And I can understand that you would like to make that statement, but unfortunately it's false. Yes, the military capability in Europe is a shambles. I've done in the previous videos about the operational capabilities of Germany's Air Force and submarine fleet. And it's actually a disgrace. But it doesn't really say that they are not capable of doing it. In the same way that they say they cannot ramp up military production. It's a question of, do they want to? Do they have to? Yes, they can convert several dual-purpose type of industries into military. They can put in the resources and force companies to expand production and so forth and so forth. And well, then you have a warlike production facility. It's not that difficult to do. It has been done before and it will be done in the future as well. It's just a matter of commitment. And also, if you look at the second Gulf War, I believe this was a Gulf War, it took them 6 months to prepare and transport all the equipment to Saudi Arabia, and from there on into launch the attack into Iraq. So we all know from military strategists that are on YouTube that, well, the guys that know, it takes time, it takes a hell of a lot of time. So, and it was also well known that in the Second World War, there was not continuous fighting. There were huge lulls in the fighting, and in that time periods, they were regrouping and resupplies, and well, there were various reasons for this. So for the West to provide a military defense for European countries against any Russian expansion is naive. But the Russians won't go that far. There's no reason for doing that. And I believe the Western leaders know that. They are throwing out propaganda and all this other stuff, but they know what's really happening. They know that Russia and China are fairly responsible, in contrast to what they are advertising and making part of the propaganda. But there's not going to be a wider conflict unless something stupid happens. That unforeseen butterfly somewhere in Ukraine that does something stupid. That one nobody can predict, and that can always change the whole picture. So believing that there will be a military conflict between the Westerners, the chances are there, the warnings are there. If some stupid people do something that they shouldn't be doing, then that would be happening. But it won't be like an overrun. There will be some form of time lapse. It doesn't happen immediately. Russians have to, in any case, mobilize their whole army. Even this limited mobilization is going to take 3 months. So if there's a real war, then there's 6 months down the line, maybe. That gives both parties to set up their armies and so forth. But there's a problem with that scenario, and that's why the West will never go, hopefully, will never go to that. Firstly, I've mentioned that there are powerful people behind the scenes in the American government. Those are the true puppeteers. They will decide how far and what will get. Then there are some reasonable people that are not fanatics that will also have a huge influence. So, no, I don't believe it will happen. There will be a switch. How painful it will be in any case, but it will be marketed as a victory. But the biggest problem is that the financial mess that is now occurring. Something that the West has totally miscalculated. They had this inflation. They thought they might be able to control it with a narrative. That didn't happen. They reacted too late with their reserve banks and the increase in interest rate, because that also has a huge implication in terms of the debt burden that companies are carrying. They didn't expect that the Russian economy would survive. They didn't expect that an alternative monetary system would start to be developed, off from the dollar and the euro. They didn't expect that so many countries in the world, non-Western world, will not support the sanctions. And now they have a problem with money, and wars cost money. And the social events, the social collapse that is going to take place in Europe, that's going to cost money. And if they don't solve that problem, then they will be removed from power. And then the Americans will lose all the work they have done in the last 70 years and plus. So you can say a new world is basically being born. Just a matter of time. Because all the dice are actually loaded against the West. So let's see. Hopefully there is not anarchy. Hopefully there is not that much pain. But again, I have to disagree with Garland's assessment. In any case, then Alexandra proceeds to mention a certain paper that was published last year about the events that the Western or the American leadership would take. And basically it said that they will, the Russians will suffer a defeat on the Ukrainian conflict, and that the sanctions and defeat will force Russia to move to the east, and then they would start a conflict with China. And then he was amazed at how accurate this piece of prediction was, and I cannot see the accuracy of this prediction. It's a rehash of some old principles that the Americans would like to see, that China and Russia would actually go into a conflict. And so basically, by being the third party to the world affairs, two other people, guys, will fight about the proverbial bone, and the third dog will run away with the bone itself. Now, this is an old concept. It's not something new. So I can totally reject that. And there's nothing amazing about that. It's wishful thinking, and I cannot understand why Alexander actually mentions that. But in any case, they progress and they talk about the American political system. Now, I'm not an expert on that, so I can only speak about what I know, and whether I'm right or wrong, that can be debated. But again, it's a way of development of a certain culture or empire or civilization, if you want to call it. The Americans have lived well for the last 70 years after the Second World War. They had unfair advantage over the world, as I've stated before. And the living standards in America were quite well. I know there's a lot of fudge fact or lies being distributed, especially when it comes to employment figures and so on, and the numbers that are shown are not the real numbers. They forget a lot of people that have stopped looking for work, and etc., etc. I'm not going to go into those details. I also know that they are fudging the inflation figures and all the other stuff. But that's all part of the narrative that the American establishment has created in order to control the population. And as I have said before, it is a complex situation. It's not a simplified. And just one of the items that how you control people is by controlling the media and the narrative. And if you do that, then you have some influence on the population. You can try to pacify them up to a certain extent. The American political system is not a democracy. That is a sham. But it has been presented, and it's continuously being emphasized and discussed, but not discussed, mentioned, never discussed really. And so this illusion of a democracy is created. The Republicans and Democrats are the same party, 90%. They do what their masters tell them, their financiers, who actually fund both sides of the aisle. And no third party can really become part of the system because the system doesn't allow it. It's just written like that. And if there is a party, then it will be absorbed. And still, at the end of the day, it's dependent on the financial contributions. And the more money you spend, the higher success of winning the election. That is how it works. So the chance of any other party getting involved in the government of America, that's a fallacy. That's wishful thinking. Unless the whole system is being destroyed. And there is a great possibility that it will happen. But America will survive. It is not the same as Europe. It does have resources. It's a huge country. There's a lot of control over the population. And still, Americans have a lot to lose. And as long as you have a lot of to lose, then you're not going to really go and put that lifestyle at risk. You know, there's a saying that, they came for my neighbor and I didn't do anything. And then they came for my second neighbor and I didn't do anything. Then they came for my friend and I didn't do anything. And when they finally came for me, then there was no more left to help me. I was the only person left. So this is like a gradual process of being assimilated. So there's still a way to go. There's still not enough anger. There's still enough control. Yes, it will slide down. Yes, there will be chaos. But not to the extent I believe it will be in Europe. In Europe, it will be a lot faster. So I don't see, I cannot agree with either Alexander on the report, or neither can I agree with Garland. But Garland is an American, which is fine, and he should know a lot more what's happening. But sometimes you are clogged by being in the ball game that you cannot step out and see the bigger picture. Alexander actually mentioned that the Roman Empire collapsed within 10 years, and it's a short period. Yes, I do agree, it's a short period, but in human life, it's a long period. And I don't think the American collapse will be on the same level as the Roman Empire, because it's not the same. And there's huge differences between these two types of empire. Well, they continue with the discussion about the possible events that will happen in Europe, and I would actually think that Garland saw some of my videos, but it seems to me we have the same view. Problems in Europe it's already starting, but it's a slow start and it's like an avalanche. And it will accelerate, and the big trouble we will start seeing in January, when the gas starts to be becoming short supply, and then all the reserves and spare money of the population will have been spent on the higher energy bills. But like I said, the question was always, what happens after the winter, when the storage tanks are empty or nearly empty, and it cannot be resupplied in time because LNGs and ships are not on immediate demand of supply as a pipeline. And then even what happens then afterwards. And you're going to see the chaos basically starting in January, February, in spring, and it will accelerate for the rest of 2023. And it would be interesting to see what happens. Right. But then there was a recent prisoner exchange, which I was quite amazed about. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia negotiated the release of about 10 a couple of high-profile Azov battalion type of prisoners, which was, well, I know a lot of people are complaining about that. And then there was a prisoner exchange issued or organized by the Turkish. And if I looked at the first numbers, it sounded like the Ukrainians got the better deal than the Russians. And it sounded a little bit imbalanced, but as they discussed and so on, and as I rightly mentioned in the conversation, we don't know what happened behind the scenes. But if you read carefully, and if the translation is accurately, then the Russians said that they were actually very glad that the Russian prisoners were released out of the dungeons and torture, they didn't really mention it, but out of the bad areas. And then all of these prisoners were giving medical attention and psychological support. And what you have to read about that these types of prisoners were of the worst kind. They were treated the worst. And it was necessary for Russia to get them out of those conditions. And maybe that is one of the reasons why they agreed to this prisoner swap. There are also some high-profile Russian officers and NGOs, what do they say? Non-commissioned officers. Yeah. They were released, so it was some high level. But I think it's not the end of the prisoner swap. There will be some more. We will hear during the day, and those were again the numbers would be in favor of the Russians. But I'm not totally sure about that. But if you look at it like that, close up, it looks a little bit funny, and one can has a lot of questions. But if one stands back, then you can see the bigger picture, and maybe the prisoner exchange was warranted, and the skewed numbers were warranted. So one shouldn't again start to become emotional about these things. Leaders and military leaders are not supposed to react emotionally, because that would be fatal to the decision they will be taking. Well, this is my assessment of their discussion and the points I disagreed with them. If you like and agree with me on how I saw the matter, then press the like button. If you disagree with me, feel free to press the dislike button. And if you want to hear more about this matter, world politics and the events in Ukraine and maybe China or so, then subscribe to my channel. And until next time, cheers.